When I saw him standing in the doorway, watching me with that quiet, unreadable expression, my heart skipped, not from fear, but from a sudden, inexplicable ache deep inside. It wasn't the shock of being caught, it was something far more complicated. I wanted to test my limits, to find out if I still had the strength to feel something wild and raw, something that could pull me out of the numbness I'd lived with for years. The house was too quiet, the walls too still, and yet here was this unexpected presence stirring a storm in my chest. I tried to steady myself, but I couldn't shake the sensation that my world was shifting beneath my feet. Before I could say anything, he smiled, just a hint, and I knew things would never be the same again. Let me tell you how it all began, and why sometimes the most ordinary moments become the ones we never forget. But first, I want to ask you, have you ever felt that restless ache to break free from what's safe and known? To risk everything just to discover who you really are? I had learned to live inside the quiet spaces of my marriage, where words were measured, emotions carefully tucked away like fragile porcelain. Our days slipped by like pale shadows on the wall, comfortable, predictable, but somehow hollow. The man I married was kind, dependable, but somewhere along the way, passion had been lost in the shuffle of responsibilities and routine. I remember the way he'd glance at me sometimes, polite, distant, as if we were two strangers sharing a house rather than a life. That absence of connection gnawed at me, a subtle ache I couldn't name but felt in every breath. It wasn't that I didn't love him anymore, it was that I felt invisible in the place where love should have lived. When we decided on the vacation, I told myself it was just a break from monotony, a chance to refresh the stale pages of our story. But beneath that, something else stirred, an unnamed hope, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, something could shift. Packing my bags, I chose clothes that felt alive against my skin, soft fabrics in muted colors, a hint of lace hidden beneath. I wanted to remember what it was like to feel desired, to feel myself again. The scent of my perfume lingered on my wrists like a secret promise. The drive to our destination stretched long and winding through quiet landscapes bathed in golden light. My husband was behind the wheel, focused on the road, humming softly to the radio. Beside me, his stepfather sat quietly, an unfamiliar presence in this chapter of our lives. I noticed the way his eyes traced the horizon with calm certainty, how his hands rested loosely on his knees, and a strange pull began to take hold in my chest. There was something about him, steady, unspoken, that unsettled the usual rhythm of my thoughts. I caught myself watching the subtle lines of his face, the gentle curve of his smile, and quickly turned away, chastising myself for such foolish distractions. Arriving at the small town felt like stepping into another world. The air smelled of salt and earth, the streets alive with colors and chatter. I could feel the pulse of life outside our controlled existence, and with it, a flicker of anticipation. That night, lying in bed, I felt a restless stirring, an echo of something forgotten. Sleep came in fits, shadows dancing behind my closed eyelids, as if my heart was already on the edge of a change I hadn't dared to name. The next morning brought the promise of new beginnings. We planned to visit the local market, a bustling place where scents and sounds wove together in a tapestry of life. As we stepped outside, the sun warmed my face and the breeze teased loose strands of hair. I sensed the delicate threads of fate pulling me forward. Walking beside him, his presence close but respectful, I felt the first cracks in the carefully built walls around my heart. The day stretched ahead, full of possibility and uncertainty, and I was not yet ready to know where it would lead. The market was alive with noise and color, a stark contrast to the quiet that had settled around our home. Vendors called out their wares with practiced enthusiasm, their voices mingling with laughter and the clatter of baskets. The scent of fresh bread and ripe fruit filled the air, weaving a tapestry of sensory details that pulled me deeper into the moment. Walking beside him, I felt an unfamiliar energy course through me, a mixture of curiosity and something softer, more urgent. Our footsteps fell in sync as we navigated the crowded aisles, passing stalls bursting with vibrant produce and handmade crafts. His presence was steady, grounding yet strangely electrifying, and I caught myself stealing glances at the way the light played on his skin, the subtle movements that betrayed an ease I longed to reclaim. There was a familiarity in the way he observed the world, but also a hint of something unspoken, a reserve that both intrigued and unsettled me. At one point, his hand brushed against mine as we reached for the same basket of figs. The touch was brief but electric, sending a shiver through me I hadn't expected. I looked up to meet his eyes, searching for meaning in their calm depths. There was a flicker of acknowledgement there, a silent understanding that neither of us dared to voice aloud. The market noise seemed to fade, leaving only the rhythm of our breathing and the unspoken tension between us. We paused at a stall where a woman sold woven scarves, her hands deftly displaying colors and textures. He picked up a deep green one, holding it against his jacket before turning to me with a slight smile. The simplicity of the gesture struck me, an offering, a moment shared amid the chaos. I found myself reaching out to touch the fabric, the softness reminding me of the tenderness I craved but rarely experienced. As we moved on, a sudden rain began to fall, light at first, then gathering strength. The crowd dispersed quickly, seeking shelter under awnings and umbrellas. We found refuge beneath a narrow doorway, pressed close together as the drops fell around us. The closeness was dizzying, the warmth of his body a stark contrast to the cool rain. Words hung suspended in the air, heavy with what was left unsaid. In that confined space, our eyes met again, and without thinking, we kissed. It was a brief, tentative touch, a crossing of a boundary that felt both terrifying and inevitable. The world outside ceased to exist for a heartbeat, replaced by the rush of emotions I had long kept locked away. When we parted, the rain had slowed to a gentle mist, but inside me, a storm was only just beginning. The rest of the day passed in a blur of colors and sensations. I found myself laughing more freely, the weight of routine lifting with each shared glance and subtle touch. Yet beneath the surface, a current of guilt and uncertainty tugged at my conscience. How could this be happening? Who had I become in this whirlwind of emotion? The questions swirled like the clouds overhead, unanswered but impossible to ignore. That evening, as we returned to the quiet of the house, I caught my reflection in the mirror, a woman caught between the life she knew and the possibilities awakening within her. The lace peeking from beneath my blouse felt like a secret rebellion, a small act of reclaiming a part of myself I had forgotten. I lay awake long after the others had fallen asleep, thoughts tangled in a web of desire, fear, and longing. In the dark, I traced the contours of the night, wondering if I could ever return to the stillness that had defined me. The kiss lingered in my mind, not just as a memory, but as a turning point. I realized then that some moments change everything, and once crossed, certain lines cannot be uncrossed. But I also knew that the path ahead was uncertain, fraught with risks and revelations I was not yet ready to face. As sleep finally claimed me, I clung to the fragile hope that this journey, however complicated and unexpected, might lead me back to myself, to a truth I had long denied. The market had been more than a place of commerce, it had become a crucible where my quiet life was melting away, forging something new in its place. And though the road was unknown, I could no longer turn back. The days that followed felt both familiar and utterly foreign, like walking a tightrope stretched between two worlds. The vacation unfolded around us, the bright sun and gentle sea breeze painting a picture of ease and escape. Yet beneath the surface, something had shifted irrevocably. I found myself drawn to him more often than I expected, noticing the quiet strength in his movements and the way his eyes seemed to hold unspoken stories. We spent long hours wandering the narrow streets of the town, stepping into little cafes and browsing through shops filled with handcrafted goods. The simplicity of these moments was deceptive, each glance, each touch, carried a weight I could neither dismiss nor fully understand. My thoughts raced, tangled between the safety of the past and the pull of something new and uncertain. One afternoon, we found ourselves sitting by the water's edge, the sun low on the horizon casting long shadows across the sand. The conversation was light at first, shared memories, fleeting jokes, but gradually it deepened. He spoke about his past with a quiet honesty, revealing fragments of a life that had been marked by both loss and resilience. His words resonated with something inside me, stirring empathy and a fragile connection that felt more real than I dared admit. I felt the warmth of his presence beside me, the subtle shift as he leaned closer, and then it happened, we kissed. No elaborate build-up or dramatic declarations, just a simple, undeniable connection that shocked me with its clarity. It was as if a dam had broken, releasing a flood of emotions I had held back for too long. The kiss lingered in my memory, a line drawn between who I was and who I might become. Returning to the house that evening, the silence felt different. The familiar creaks and shadows took on a new meaning, underscored by the awareness of what had just transpired. I caught my reflection in the mirror again, this time, seeing a woman awakened, trembling on the edge of change. The lace beneath my blouse felt like a secret kept just for myself, a small act of rebellion against the life I'd known. But with this awakening came a swirl of doubts. Was I betraying the years shared with my husband? Was this feeling worth the risk it carried? The tension built quietly, like a storm gathering strength in the distance, ready to reshape everything in its path. Each interaction with him now held layers of meaning, coded messages in the tilt of a head or a glance too brief to be casual. Our conversations danced around the edges of truth, neither fully admitting nor denying the growing bond. The space between us was charged with possibility and fear, an electric current neither of us was ready to face head-on. I noticed how my husband seemed increasingly absorbed in his own world, unaware or unwilling to see the fissures growing beneath the surface of our marriage. The distance between us stretched further, the unspoken becoming an ever-present barrier. Yet, despite the guilt that gnawed at me, I found myself yearning for more moments like those by the sea, moments where I felt seen, desired, and alive. As night fell, I lay awake again, my mind a tangled web of hope and hesitation. The path ahead was unclear, shadowed by the consequences I had yet to face. But beneath the uncertainty, a new truth was taking root, a recognition that some parts of me had been asleep for too long and that awakening could not be undone. In the quiet of the night, I whispered to myself a question I wasn't yet ready to answer: what do I truly want from this life, and am I brave enough to pursue it? The days blurred into one another with a strange intensity, as if time itself were holding its breath. Each morning I woke with a knot in my stomach, the weight of unspoken emotions pressing down on me. The vacation, meant to be an escape, had become a crucible for feelings I barely understood and could no longer ignore. The lines between right and wrong seemed to dissolve, replaced by a tangled web of desires and doubts. We found ourselves seeking moments alone, the crowded streets and lively cafes giving way to quieter corners and shaded parks. One afternoon, a sudden downpour scattered the tourists, and we took shelter beneath a narrow stone archway. The rain drummed steadily on the cobblestones, a rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart. His presence close beside me was a steadying force, yet also a spark that ignited something restless within. Words were few, their meanings layered beneath pauses and sideways glances. There was an unspoken challenge in the air, an invitation to step beyond the familiar and into a realm where consequences were momentarily suspended. I could feel the tension building, a delicate balance between restraint and surrender. The unexpected offer to walk farther into the town, away from the others, was both exhilarating and frightening. The narrow lanes twisted through old stone buildings, their shadows deepening as the sky threatened more rain. Each step we took seemed to carry us further from the safety of routine and closer to an unknown precipice. In those moments, every gesture was amplified, the brush of a hand against a sleeve, the quick catch of a breath when our eyes met. The world narrowed to the space between us, charged with possibility and peril. It was impossible to ignore the electricity crackling beneath the surface, a silent conversation spoken through touch and glance. The rain began to soften, leaving the air thick with the scent of wet earth and blooming flowers. We paused beneath a lantern's glow, the soft light casting a halo around us. Without thought, our lips met again, we kissed. The simplicity of the act belied its significance. It was a quiet surrender, a line crossed without fanfare but with profound consequence. As we pulled apart, the reality of what we had done settled like a weight. I was acutely aware of the boundaries we had tested and the fragile balance that now teetered on the edge of change. The thrill was tempered by the knowledge that once crossed, there was no returning to innocence. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I caught myself replaying the kiss, the feel of his lips, the rapid beat of my own heart. Yet beneath the exhilaration lurked a steady undercurrent of guilt and fear. What if this moment unraveled everything I had known? What if the life I had built came crashing down? Back at the house, silence was thick between us. My husband remained distant, absorbed in his own distractions, oblivious or unwilling to see the shifting currents beneath our feet. I longed for clarity, for a way to reconcile the conflicting emotions tearing me apart. Sleep eluded me once more. In the dark, I wrestled with the questions that now defined my waking hours. Was this just a fleeting escape, or the start of something irrevocable? Could I reclaim parts of myself that had been lost, or was I tearing apart the life I had vowed to protect? The morning light brought no answers, only the steady pull of the unknown. The path ahead was uncertain, shadowed by fear and hope alike. But one thing was clear, the quiet life I had known was no longer an option. The storm within me demanded to be heard, and I could not turn away. The days unfolded with a strange mixture of routine and heightened awareness. Each morning began like the last, the quiet hum of the house, the measured steps of my husband moving through his rituals, the soft light filtering through the curtains. Yet beneath this surface of normalcy, my world was shifting in ways I could neither control nor fully understand. I found myself drawn again and again to moments with him, the man who had become both a source of comfort and confusion. We shared small excursions away from the group, walks along the shoreline, afternoons exploring narrow streets lined with flowering vines. Each encounter was laden with meaning, every glance and gesture a subtle conversation beneath the words we spoke. The air between us was charged, yet we danced around the unspoken, careful not to name what was growing in the spaces between. I watched the way his eyes held a quiet intensity, how his presence filled the room without a single word. It was a magnetic pull, difficult to resist and harder still to define. At times, the weight of my choices pressed heavily on me. Guilt whispered in the corners of my mind, reminding me of vows and years shared, of promises made and the life I had built. But there was also a growing awareness of what had been missing, the warmth, the connection, the feeling of being truly seen. The contrast between these realities created a tension that tightened with each passing day. One afternoon, we found ourselves alone on a quiet terrace, the sun dipping low and casting a golden glow over the sea. The conversation turned to the past, to regrets and hopes, to the things we had left unsaid. In that vulnerable space, we reached a new understanding, a fragile bridge between who we were and who we might become. Without hesitation, we kissed. It was a moment simple in its truth, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had deepened beyond words. The kiss was neither rushed nor lingering, just a quiet gesture that marked a point of no return. The days following carried the weight of this unspoken shift. I felt caught between two worlds, the familiar safety of my marriage and the thrilling uncertainty of this new connection. My husband remained distant, immersed in his own concerns, unaware or perhaps unwilling to confront the changes unfolding around him. The inner turmoil grew. I questioned my desires, my loyalty, my very sense of self. How could I reconcile the woman I had been with the one awakening inside? What price would this new path demand? Yet, amid the doubts and fears, there was a growing clarity. I was no longer willing to live in the shadows of my own life, to suppress the parts of me longing to breathe. The journey ahead was uncertain and fraught with risk, but it was also the only way forward. As night fell, I lay awake, the quiet of the house wrapping around me like a shroud. The future stretched before me, undefined, daunting, but alive with possibility. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the stirring of hope. The atmosphere in the house grew heavier with each passing day, the unspoken tension weaving itself into the fabric of our lives. I could sense the subtle shifts in the way my husband moved through the rooms, quieter now, more distracted. His eyes often held a distant look, as if he was wrestling with something he couldn't put into words. Meanwhile, the man who had become the center of my thoughts remained a constant presence, calm, steady, yet carrying an undercurrent of something unresolved. Our conversations were measured and careful, layered with meaning yet deliberately vague. There was an unspoken understanding that what was happening between us could not be openly acknowledged, but the intensity of our connection refused to be ignored. We both seemed to tread lightly, balancing on the edge of something neither of us wanted to fully confront, yet neither could walk away from. The days were punctuated by stolen moments, a glance across a crowded room, a brief touch that lingered just long enough to send a shiver down my spine. These fleeting connections grew in significance, each one adding weight to the invisible thread binding us together. I became acutely aware of my own reactions, the way my pulse quickened, the subtle flush that crept up my neck, the restless energy that left me yearning for more. At times, I found myself questioning the morality of my feelings, the promises I had made years ago now feeling fragile and distant. Yet, the reality was undeniable. I was awakening to desires and emotions that had long been dormant, and the man beside me was the catalyst. His presence was a reminder that life could be different, that passion and connection were still within reach. In the quiet moments alone, I wrestled with conflicting emotions. Guilt clashed with longing, fear battled with hope. The walls I had built to protect myself were crumbling, revealing vulnerabilities I hadn't faced in years. I wondered what it meant to truly live, to embrace the complexity of human desire without shame or regret. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of amber and rose, we found ourselves alone once again. The air was thick with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. Without hesitation, we spent the night together, a phrase simple in its telling, yet monumental in its significance. That night marked a turning point, a deepening of the bond that had begun as a flicker and now burned with undeniable force. In the aftermath, the weight of our choices settled upon me. The familiar rhythm of my life was forever altered, replaced by a new reality filled with uncertainty and possibility. My husband's growing distance was a stark reminder of the fractures spreading beneath the surface of our marriage. I faced the consequences of my desires, knowing that the path ahead was fraught with challenges. Yet, despite the turmoil, there was an undeniable sense of liberation. For the first time in years, I felt connected to myself, to my feelings, to the possibility of a life lived fully and authentically. The journey was far from over, and the road ahead uncertain, but I was no longer afraid to take the first steps into the unknown. The morning after felt suspended between reality and a dream. The house was quiet, but inside me, a tempest churned. I woke aware of a new weight on my shoulders, an unspoken commitment that transformed everything I thought I knew about myself and my life. The man beside me, once a distant figure, now felt impossibly close, both in body and in the quiet spaces of my heart. Our shared night together was not marked by grand declarations or promises, it was instead a steady acknowledgement of truths too long ignored. The simplicity of our connection deepened the complexity of my emotions. It was a moment of clarity wrapped in uncertainty, where desire met consequence, and hope mingled with fear. As the day unfolded, I became acutely aware of the gulf growing between my husband and me. His routine remained unaltered, yet I sensed his awareness of the shifting tides, though he said nothing. The distance in his eyes was a silent accusation and a refuge all at once. I felt torn between loyalty to the life we had built and the intoxicating pull of a new beginning. The man who had become my confidant and companion carried his own burdens. His quiet strength was tinged with regret and hesitation, hinting at past wounds and uncertain futures. Our conversations, though few in words, were rich in unspoken understanding. We navigated the fragile terrain of our feelings with care, knowing that each step held potential for both healing and heartbreak. Days blended into nights as the tension between duty and desire wove through my thoughts. I noticed the small things, the way my skin tingled at a glance, the restless stirring in my chest when we were near, the secret smiles shared in moments of solitude. Each sensation was a reminder of the life I longed for and the risks entailed in pursuing it. Yet, amidst the emotional upheaval, there was a profound sense of awakening. I rediscovered facets of myself long buried beneath years of routine and expectation. The simple act of being seen and understood ignited a spark that had lain dormant, offering a glimpse of freedom I had nearly forgotten. As night fell again, I found myself reflecting on the journey thus far. The choices I faced were daunting, and the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty. But I no longer feared the unknown. Instead, I embraced the complexity of my feelings, the messy, beautiful entanglement of love, loss, and hope. In that quiet moment, I made a silent vow to live honestly, to face the consequences of my desires, and to seek a life that honored the truth of who I was becoming. The road would be difficult, marked by challenges and sacrifices, but it was mine to walk. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready. The day he told me he was leaving arrived without warning, though I had felt it approaching like a storm on the horizon. There was no grand announcement, no dramatic farewell, just a quiet packing of bags, a lingering glance that spoke volumes, and then the closing of a door that echoed in the hollow spaces of my heart. His departure shattered the fragile equilibrium I had struggled to maintain. The world I knew, already trembling beneath the weight of secrets and unspoken truths, seemed to crumble entirely. I was left standing in the ruins, grappling with the void he left behind and the chaos that now surged within me. In the days that followed, the house felt unbearably silent. Every corner held memories of his presence, every shadow seemed to whisper of what had been. My husband's distance deepened, his attempts to reach me faltered beneath the weight of my own turmoil. We existed side by side yet remained worlds apart, bound by shared history but separated by walls built from pain and betrayal. I was caught in a relentless tide of emotions, grief for what was lost, guilt for the choices made, and a desperate yearning for understanding. The lines between love and regret blurred, leaving me disoriented and raw. Nights were the hardest. The darkness amplified the echoes of my heartache and the questions that had no answers. Yet, amid the wreckage, a flicker of resilience emerged. I began to see that loss could be a crucible for transformation, that from the ashes of what was, something new might arise. The pain was undeniable, but it was also a catalyst, forcing me to confront the truth of my desires, my fears, and my strength. Conversations with my husband grew strained but honest, tentative steps toward a future neither of us fully understood. We navigated the fragile terrain of rebuilding, recognizing the fractures that could not simply be mended but required new foundations. The process was slow and fraught, marked by moments of hope and despair. In the quiet moments alone, I grappled with my own reflection, who I had been, who I was, and who I wanted to become. The journey inward was as challenging as any external conflict, demanding courage and honesty I had long denied myself. As the days turned into weeks, I began to find a fragile peace, not in forgetting or erasing the past, but in embracing its complexity. The man who left had changed my life irrevocably, but he had also opened the door to a future shaped by my own choices. I realized that healing was not a destination but a process, a continuous unfolding of acceptance, growth, and self-discovery. And though the path was uncertain, I was no longer afraid to walk it. The weeks that followed were a careful navigation through the aftermath of upheaval. The quiet spaces in the house felt different, no longer just empty, but charged with the weight of what had been and what was yet to come. I found myself walking the delicate line between the past and an uncertain future, searching for meaning in the fragments left behind. My husband and I moved cautiously, our interactions measured and tentative. The distance that had grown between us was now impossible to ignore, but beneath the silence lay a shared understanding that we both needed to heal, to rebuild in some form what had been broken. Conversations were careful, often halting, as if each word might crack the fragile surface we had created. Within myself, the struggle was no less intense. The absence of the man who had left a void I wasn't sure how to fill. I grappled with conflicting emotions, loss mingled with relief, regret entwined with a newfound sense of possibility. The complexities of my desires and choices unfolded slowly, revealing layers I had not expected to confront. I spent long hours reflecting on who I was and who I wanted to become. The journey inward was demanding and relentless, forcing me to face uncomfortable truths and embrace the ambiguity of change. The safe certainties of my former life had given way to questions without easy answers. Despite the turmoil, moments of clarity emerged. I began to recognize that the pain of separation was also an opportunity, an opening to redefine myself on my own terms. The process was neither linear nor swift, marked by setbacks and breakthroughs, but it was undeniably mine. Interactions with others took on new significance. Friends and acquaintances noticed the subtle shifts in me, the way I carried myself with a tentative confidence. Their questions were gentle, their support sometimes hesitant, but always a reminder that I was not alone on this path. The house, once a symbol of routine and predictability, became a space for transformation. Rooms that had held memories of old life now echoed with the possibility of new beginnings. I found solace in small rituals, morning light filtering through curtains, the scent of brewing coffee, the quiet moments before the world awoke. As time passed, I began to see the contours of a future shaped by choice rather than circumstance. The past remained a part of me, its lessons etched into my being, but it no longer defined the limits of what was possible. I was learning to embrace uncertainty, to find strength in vulnerability, and to trust in my own resilience. The path ahead was still unclear, fraught with challenges and unknowns, but it was illuminated by a growing sense of hope. I was no longer the woman trapped by expectation and fear. I was someone reborn from the ashes of loss, ready to forge a new story, one written with honesty, courage, and an open heart. The finality of his departure settled over me like a winter's dusk, slow, inevitable, and unyielding. The man who had stirred a tempest in my soul was gone, leaving behind echoes of what might have been and a void that seemed impossible to fill. The world I had known, fragile and fragmented, now stood at a crossroads where the past met the future in uncertain embrace. In the stillness of the days that followed, I faced the raw edges of my reality. The silence of the house was heavy, filled with memories and unanswered questions. My husband and I navigated a landscape altered beyond recognition, where words failed and emotions ran deep beneath the surface. We were together yet profoundly apart, each grappling with loss and the reshaping of our lives. I confronted the complexities of my own heart, the desires awakened, the guilt born, the strength discovered in vulnerability. The journey had been long and fraught, marked by moments of joy and despair, clarity and confusion. Yet through it all, I emerged with a clearer sense of self, tempered by experience and the courage to embrace change. The lessons etched into my soul were not easily forgotten. I learned that love is neither simple nor static, but a living force that demands honesty, compassion, and sometimes sacrifice. I understood that the pursuit of happiness requires bravery, the willingness to step into the unknown and trust in one's own resilience. As I looked toward the horizon, I saw a path illuminated not by certainty but by possibility. The future was unwritten, a canvas waiting for the brushstrokes of choice and intention. I was no longer bound by fear or expectation, but empowered to shape a life authentic to who I had become. The story of my journey, of loss, love, and transformation, was not a tale of endings, but of beginnings. It was a testament to the human spirit's capacity for renewal, a reminder that even in the aftermath of upheaval, there is hope. And so, with a heart both heavy and hopeful, I stepped forward into the unfolding chapters of my life, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer held me captive. I was free to write my own story, one of truth, courage, and the enduring power of self-discovery. All 10 parts are now